is Mystery Meat's Fine Dining podcast, helping foodies discover new restaurants and new friends. Here's your host, the founder of Mystery Meat, Seth Ressler.
Hello and welcome to Mystery Meat's Fine Dining podcast. My name is Seth Ressler. I'm your host. This is the podcast for foodies who love travel and travelers who love food. Each week we go to a different city, we talk to a local food blogger or other food expert, we find out everything we need to know about the culinary scene in their town. Today we are going to fine dining in St. Louis. We're going to talk to Laura Bentley of the Moscow Circus blog. We'll find out a little bit from her about the St. Louis culinary scene. We'll get a restaurant recommendation, and then we will play Out of the Frying Pan. I just want to let you know right up the top that we're going to mention a lot of things in this podcast. We'll put links to all of those things up on the Mystery Meat website so that you can go check them out later. Laura.
How are you doing, Seth?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. That sounds fun.
All right, full disclaimer, I have done some time in St. Louis, but not a lot. I lived there for about 10 months. It was about 10 years ago. I'm sure the culinary scene has completely changed since I've been there. And really, I only ate at one sushi restaurant over and over and over because my boss would make me.
Well, you can still be an honorary St. Louis, and then we can extend that. You'll have to come back and try some of these places out because it's been pretty extraordinary, even just in the last several years, the changes that take place here.
And what I remember about St. Louis, and maybe this has changed, is that there was not a lot going on downtown when I lived there. And that really St. Louis was sort of a collection of neighborhoods. You had things like, like University City, and you had areas like Clayton and sort of a collection of areas. Is that still true?
Yeah, absolutely. When you ask what areas you want to focus on if you were a foodie, there's too many because there's so many different individual municipalities or neighborhoods that are kind of little worlds unto themselves, and each of them offer totally different experiences in terms of the restaurants or bars or shopping or whatever you're looking for.
Now, is there a lot of nightlife in downtown St. Louis these days?
There is. Downtown proper, there's lots of college kids who like to go down along the waterfront on someplace called The Landing. The grad school set tends to go more toward South City and a region called Benton Park, Soulard, Cherokee Street, and Midtown. And these are all not technically in the downtown area, but they're still part of the city. So totally different feels.
And let's give people a couple of landmarks that they may all recognize. I mean, first of all, when people think of St. Louis, they think of the Arch.
Absolutely.
Which is right there on the water, right? It's on the Mississippi.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And that's where the Landing is, right, that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Right along the waterfront.
Obviously, St. Louis is a huge sports town. Talk to me about where some of the sports teams play.
It is the biggest baseball town you can imagine.
Oh, yeah.
The Cardinals, heart and soul of the place, Busch Stadium, near and dear to us all. And it kind of plays well to some of the strengths in terms of food here. We've got a lot of German heritage, beer, pretzels, that goes pretty well with baseball.
And when I was there, everything was named Busch.
Right. In fact, the building of the law school that I went to at WashU is Anheuser-Busch Hall. So plenty of AV InBev products served there. But yeah, that's definitely a huge presence. But now, more than ever, it's really moved a lot more beyond just Busch because we have an incredible craft brewery scene here.
Oh, so that's very interesting because, I mean, obviously you think Budweiser when you think St. Louis. And I've toured the Anheuser-Busch brewery. Have you gotten a chance to do that?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I've done that big tour. That was a fun thing to do with my brother or out-of-town friends because it's just, it is a landmark. But one of our actually the largest beer producer that's actually based in St. Louis now, Schlafly, is a long-standing craft brewer, and they do some really excellent tours of theirs.
All right, we're going to dig in a little bit more to St. Louis, but before we do that, I know you've got a trivia question for me.
Well, I have mixed emotions about this. St. Louis holds on to its glory days of the 1904 World's Fair. It's been over 100 years. We can't seem to let it go. But there is some good trivia associated with that. Food-wise, there were maybe, arguably, 3 foods that were introduced at the World's Fair. And really, that's where they jumped off and became popular in the country. So the trivia question is, what are those 3 foods?
So what 3 foods were introduced to the world at the St. Louis World Fair?
In 1904.
In 1904. I know St. Louis has a lot of sort of regional quirky foods. I know you've got things like toasted ravioli there. Are these quirky St. Louis foods, or are these mainstream things like milk
They're fairly mainstream. They're things that when you hear them, you probably, and with probably good reason, will think that surely was not introduced in 1904 at St. Louis. But they're pretty common. It's none of the idiosyncratic St. Louis foods like pork steak that really no one else outside of St. Louis understands what that is. But they're pretty basic.
Gotcha. So it's and it's something that I might think would be even older than 1904, like older than 100 years old?
Yeah, very much so.
All right. And there's 3 of them. Okay, I got to think about this.
Okay.
And while I do, let's talk about some of these idiosyncratic St. Louis foods, because I know you've got a bunch of them. What is a pork steak?
A pork steak is a cut that comes out of the pork shoulder or butt, and that's why actually I have trouble tracking down a pork shoulder if I'm going to make carnitas or something in St. Louis, because it all gets cut up into these steaks, and they're a mainstay of picnics and kind of summer barbecue food in St. Louis. Pretty tender and looks very much like a steak, which is kind of interesting.
Huh.
But and you mentioned the toasted ravioli, which in St. Louis, when we say toasted, we do mean fried and covered in some kind of breadcrumb cheese concoction.
Right.
It's got some basic meat filling, and sometimes it can be filled with cheese. If you are on a buffet line getting cocktail snacks, you're probably going to see toasted ravioli here.
Okay.
And let's see here. On the sweeter end, there's something called Gooey butter cake.
What is that?
I looked up the recipe at one point, and it's pretty simple. It's kind of like what the name sounds like. It's a gooey cake that's basically just cake mix and cream cheese and butter, so that the kind of the edges of it get real crusty and the inside is very gooey.
That sounds good. Let me ask you a couple others. You got a funky pizza there, right?
Yes, and WashU attracts a lot of non-St. Louisans and brings them into the area. And most of them deride the classic St. Louis pizza, popularized by emos and others, that uses Provel cheese. It's kind of really creamy texture. If you get it delivered with more than 3 toppings on it, it's probably going to slide off the top of your pizza. But it may be an acquired taste, but that's another one of our little specialties here.
I just remember that being really unusual.
Yeah, again, like the pork steak, didn't know that was weird until I had other people tell me that.
And then last thing, what is a concrete?
The concrete, most popularly at Ted Drew's, which is along the old Route 66, is basically this ice cream that they mix up, and you can get toppings mixed in. And instead of having your toppings on top of the ice cream, it's all mixed in. It's not soft serve. It's a lot denser than that. And say you place your order at one of the fine people at Ted Drew's, and you're standing outside on a hot summer day in St. Louis, they will flip that cup upside down just to hit home the fact that this thing's pretty dense, and it won't come out.
So that's a place definitely to check out, Ted Drew's, if you're in St. Louis.
Absolutely. If you are here and you're meeting St. Louisans and they don't take you there in summertime or even right now, I would doubt their St. Louisan status if they don't take you there.
All right, so we talked about the fact that St. Louis is sort of this collection of neighborhoods, and I know that there's a lot, but if I'm a foodie and I want to come in and I only have time to explore 1 or 2, where would you suggest that I start?
So if you're visiting here, and if you're staying at a hotel, you may be staying somewhere near the Central West End or Clayton. Now, Central West End's closer to the city. Clayton's more kind of based in the county. If you're in Clayton, that's not a bad place to start. But if you're more towards the city, I would focus on Soulard and Benton Park, and maybe venturing into the Hill, which is kind of the Italian stronghold in the city.
And you mentioned a lot of the craft brewers. Is that something you're seeing come up a lot in the city?
Yeah, absolutely. Since I've been back, there has been a proliferation of almost a dozen new craft breweries here in St. Louis. For a long while, it was really just Schlafly that was here. They were ahead of their time in terms of the craft brewery kind of revolution across the country. But yeah, in the last 3 years, we've seen offshoots from AB start up their own. That's Urban Chestnut. They do a wonderful job. And then there's a lot of smaller shops that are just getting their grounding, and they may not bottle, they may not have draft options in restaurants, but you can go to these individual craft breweries and try stuff out. Some of the more recent ones are the Civil Life, Four Hands, Perennial Artisan Ales. They're all kind of in this up-and-coming class of craft brewers in St. Louis.
Any other trends you're seeing in the city besides just the craft beers coming up?
Along those lines, I've been seeing a number of craft brewers put in beer gardens, which, again, kind of going back to the classic German heritage here in St. Louis, is a fun little place to go drink your beer. Although it's somewhat questionable in July when we have multiple weeks above 100. I don't know if that's quite what the beer garden had in mind, but it's certainly something that I think is kind of fun.
So describe a beer garden for me. I mean, as you go in, what are the characteristics of a great beer garden?
Open air, longer kind of communal tables, some kind of covering, and oftentimes instead of getting individual glasses, we'll serve things in pitchers. Because the idea is just to cultivate this kind of group convivial atmosphere where everybody's enjoying their pint. And I think the atmosphere portion of it is what's cool because everybody's got great beer. It's kind of how you package it.
I love that. I mean, in the winter, I like holing up in a nice dark brew pub, but in the summer, or even the spring and fall, I love being outside and drinking beer and sharing it with friends.
Yep, can't be beat. And if you are coming to St. Louis and you do want to avoid our horrendous kind of summer, July and fall outside with a beer, I don't know if you can get better than that.
Nice. Are there any big events in the city of St. Louis that revolve around food that we should know about?
There are. This city loves its food. There are some smaller events that I actually like to go to. On Labor Day weekend, pretty much every year in the Central West End, there's a Greek community surrounding a Greek Orthodox church. They do a festival, and it's a lot of pastries and Greek music, and again, a huge crowd, but it's a lot of fun, and it's right next to Forest Park, so you could grab a selection of pastries and maybe some spanakopita and go out into the park and get some distance and enjoy the fall weather.
Oh, and that's cool. And that park, for people who don't know, is incredible.
Yeah, it's massive. It has all of our kind of primary cultural outlets, the art museum, the zoo, the history museum, and all of these are free and surrounded by this gorgeous park that there's, if it's a pretty day, or even if it's not a pretty day, that park gets packed. And there's picnicking areas, and I have actually a couple times will venture to one of our barbecue establishments, Bogarts or Pappy's, or whatever your flavor is, and you can pick up a to-go order and reserve at one of the stations at the park, and maybe even get a pony keg from one of the craft brewers, and that's a great way to use that resource in St. Louis.
Oh, very cool. Any other events that you want to mention?
Gosh, I keep going back to the beer. It sounds like I got an issue, but I don't really. It's just the fact
that's okay. St. Louis is a big beer town. Like, let's just call it what it is.
I know. Yeah, actually, Schlafly puts on some wonderful festivals. That one is their Hop in the City that happens every fall. It takes place in a parking lot in Midtown, and it's all the beers that they've produced in an entire year. People are walking around with pretzel necklaces and buy big and playing bag toss games, and that's a lot of fun. But they do things all throughout the year. Sometimes it's Belgian beers and mussels, sometimes it's stout and oysters, but they fly in this excellent product that pairs with their beers, and there's huge events with music, and they have a festival quality to them.
All right, nice. So if I'm going to St. Louis, I got to get prepared to get my beer on.
I would think so.
Very cool. All right, in just a few moments, we're going to talk to you about a restaurant recommendation that you said, a nice little Italian place. So we're going to find out about that in just a sec. All right, before we get to the restaurant recommendation, I want to make sure that everybody knows what Mystery Meat is. Mystery Meat is this social dining group. We started it in Boston a couple years ago. It's now spread to San Francisco. We're going to Seattle, and we want to bring it to your town as well. Here's how it works. A bunch of foodies get together to have a meal, but they don't find out where they're going until 24 hours in advance. I mean, when you buy your tickets, you don't know. It could be anywhere. So you got to be adventurous. You got to be somebody who's like, look, I like to explore. Because if you're not that kind of person, this is not going to be the thing for you. But if you are, if you love trying new things and you love meeting new people, absolutely, we want you to come to a Mystery Meat dinner. How do you get a Mystery Meat dinner in your town? You go to mysterymeat.org, click the big orange button that says Get an Invitation, and sign up. And when we see a bunch of people interested in your town, we'll put one together. And we want to come there real soon, all right? Laura from the Moscow Circus blog in St. Louis. You asked me a trivia question.
That's right.
You asked me to name 3 foods that debuted at the 1904 St. Louis Fair.
Yes, allegedly. Do you have any idea what the 3 foods are?
I'll give some guesses.
Okay.
Because you said they're fairly mainstream foods.
Mm-hmm.
The hot dog?
Yes, that is one of them. The hot dog.
The hot dog is one of them. Hot dog debuted at the 1904 St. Louis Fair.
Yes, probably in our more common conception of it, because it's not exactly as if sausages didn't exist before, but the kind that was kind of packaged for mass consumption at an outdoor event as we know it. That's the kind of conception of the hot dog that supposedly debuted at the World's Fair.
So there's one. Ding, 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 ding. Yay.
Yeah, you got it.
But now I got to do two more.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that this is from Italy before, but maybe I don't know. Maybe this is one of those things that we think has roots in foreign places, but is really American. Is pizza one of them?
No. No.
All right, and let me guess one more.
Okay.
One more food that would have debuted at the St. Louis World's Fair.
Or beverage. I was playing unfair. I probably should have included that.
Or
yeah,
beverage. All right, then I'm going to say that doesn't make it. All right, then give me the other two. What are the other two foods that were
All right, so supposedly iced tea was debuted at the World's Fair.
Really?
Something with the mass quantities they had to brew, kind of having a large availability of ice, something to do with that.
Okay.
But also kind of in the keeping everybody cool frame of mind, the third item is an ice cream cone.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I think it was the waffle cone as opposed to a cake cone. So it was kind of having the large griddles and then wrapped around and then dumping your scoop of ice cream in there.
All right, very cool. I had no idea. All right, so let me ask you. I asked you for a restaurant recommendation. And you have a great little Italian joint. Tell me about it.
Well, so this is extremely new, extremely buzzworthy right now. The name of the place is Pasteuria. It has been opened by one of the big names in kind of St. Louis food right now, Gerard Craft. And he has a couple other restaurants. What you're going to find at Pasteuria is not like what you're going to find at any of the restaurants on the hill. Like I said, the Italian stronghold. You're not going to find gloppy cheese or big meatballs. And don't get me wrong, I think those things are just fine. But Pasteuria focuses on the pasta, which kind of makes sense. So the toppings and whatever accompaniments they have with the pastas are pretty understated for the most part.
Now, does that mean that this is still a traditional Italian place?
Very much so, in the sense that, that he researches his restaurants pretty thoroughly, and a lot of this has come out of what he has conceived of as very traditional Italian fare during his travels. So, it is a version of traditional Italian fare, just maybe not in the sense that St. Louisans are used to it.
All right, very cool. So I walk into Pasteuria. What's the vibe like? What's the atmosphere in the restaurant?
So Pasteuria is located in a very kind of modern building. Because it has such a modern feel, it's very open, very high ceilings. It actually wasn't what I was expecting in light of some of his other restaurants that I've gone to. And it has a very open plan kind of feel. There is a station of seats where the chefs are working, so you can kind of watch them, which is fun. And there's even these large communal tables where you may not know who you're sitting next to.
Really? So this is the kind of place where you can sit down and your neighbors may be new friends.
Since it's St. Louis, you have all possibility of knowing them. They're probably your neighbor's daughter's ex-husband or something. So you'll find a connection here. And even if you're from out of town, you're going to find a connection. So, and right now, because it is so popular, and although I don't see this dying off anytime soon because of the quality of the restaurant and the big name behind it, but there tends to be a pretty long wait. And so in addition to all the seating, there's quite a bit of milling around by the bar of people just kind of waiting and enjoying and taking in the scene.
Oh, very cool. So we finally get seated and we're looking at the menu and start me off with an appetizer. What do you recommend?
They have some crispy risotto balls that for the most part everyone goes gaga over. I think they're great. I tend to want to save up room for the pasta, but if you're going all out, the crispy risotto balls are good. The shaved kale, which is kind of a hearty version of a Caesar because it has anchovy dressing and pecorino, that's great, although it's a pretty healthy amount, even if you get the small. And the shrimp salad is kind of nice, although if you do both that and a pasta, that's pretty impressive. Even though this is not your traditional huge portion type Italian restaurant that you might go to of a family endeavor, it is more gourmet. You're still going to get a pretty healthy portion at Pasteuria.
Right, so we got to make sure we have enough room for the main dish.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you recommend for that?
The bucatini alla matriciana, and I am most likely butchering all the Italian, is...
Better you than me.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a shot, too. Bucatini, it's kind of the long... At first glance, it may look like spaghetti, but it actually has a small hole running all through it, and that gives an interesting bite to the texture of the pasta. And As I said, everything's pretty understated in terms of what they mix with the pasta because they don't want to overshadow it. But with the alla micidiana, it's a spicier tomato sauce with some pork elements to it. And that, that hits it home. And left over, it's pretty fantastic if you don't eat all of it in one sitting.
So there's a real focus here on the texture of the pasta.
Absolutely. Every time I've been there, in the front station by the window, there is a guy making pasta, and you can watch, and I think at this point, they're now packaging it for sale if you want to go pick up your own pasta and then treat it however you would like at home. That truly is kind of the focus of the restaurant, because the textures that they're using, whether it's the pappardelle or the garganelle, there's all these different fun shapes, and they're constantly kind of changing them.
Oh, very cool. So the bucatini you recommend?
Absolutely. The pappardelle with smoked pork and apples and mascarpone, I think is great. I think it's a little treacherous to eat, depending on who your company is, just because of the size of the pasta, but I always enjoy it.
And do we have room for dessert after all of this?
You should. I have a very high requirement for anything that's in this kind of frozen dairy category, and the gelato at Pasteuria is genuinely some of the best stuff I've ever had. I had the salted caramel and pistachio gelato, and you can split it. You can get, if you're indecisive like I am, you can get a dish that's split between two. I would definitely sample a couple.
So talk to me about the salted caramel, because that sounds really good.
It hits all the right notes of having a little bit of salt with sweet, and because it's gelato, it has a very nice and light texture, and it's not so rich that you're struggling through it. So like any good cocktail, it went down a little bit too easily. So
nice. Speaking of cocktails, what do we got on the drink list there?
They do have a nice selection of Italian wines to kind of complement the whole crust of the restaurant. And especially if you're doing the appetizer and the main dish and gelato and you're trying to not go too overboard, they have actually a really excellent house wine option where they will give you a carafe of either the house red or house white, and that'll be about 3 pours in it. And they're healthy pours, so I actually would not want anything more than that.
What are we dropping on this meal here? I mean, how much is this going to set us back?
You can definitely get towards the $40 range if you're doing the whole enchilada. If you're just going in for a little wine and pasta, you're going to be just around $25 or so.
All right, Pasteuria, thank you for the fantastic recommendation. Are you ready to play a little game?
It sounds fun, sure.
All right, we call this game out of the frying pan. Here's how it works. I'm going to ask you for some recommendations. You're just going to tell me the first thing that pops into your mind. You ready?
I think so.
All right. You mentioned a lot of the great beers that are in St. Louis. Where's the place to go with the best beer selection?
I think I'm going to go with Schlafly. It is not only because it's the most established of all of our kind of craft brew options, they just have the most solid rotation of beers. They have their standard favorites that are Pilsners and Pale Ale and Kolsch, but they also have seasonal releases that have a steady following, like their pumpkin ale.
I love pumpkin beer. Oh.
It's good, and when they stop selling it, they stop selling it. I've had friends try to track it down, and if they find out you've got a six-pack, you may be bartering. So that's great. And Schlafly actually has 2 locations. They have a location in the city, kind of in the Midtown region. It's a larger building. That's where they have all their festivals. But their Maplewood location, which is technically in the county, they also have music. And it has a different vibe and a different menu and most of the same beer options.
All right, so Schlafly it is. If I'm going on a first date, what's the best place to go for a first date?
How to put this delicately? What's your... How much do you want to impress the lady?
Seal the deal.
Seal the deal. Well, you know what? I'm actually going someplace tonight that I think would be an excellent place. And it actually is, it's another Italian place, but it's on a totally different sphere than Pastaria. It's a place called Efratolimi, and I'm actually really looking forward to it. It's been a little while since I've been there, and they, like Pastaria, will have quite a bit of rotation in what they do on their menu, but it is top-notch in terms of atmosphere. It's owned and run by one of the restaurateurs in St. Louis. It's kind of one of the bigger names. Her name's Zoe Robinson Pigeon, and it's got candlelight, it's intimate, it's cozy, the food's great, plenty of wine. That's where I would go.
Nice. All right, St. Louis, obviously a huge sports town. You've got the ramps, and I was there. The 10 months that I was there was the 10 months that Kurt Warner had his Cinderella story. It was fantastic. So you've obviously got the St. Louis Rams. You've obviously got the Cardinals. You've got the Blues. You've got some great sports teams coming out of St. Louis. Where is your favorite place to go to watch the game?
Let's see here. I would say the Post in Maplewood. It's not going to be a craft brewery. It has kind of your classic sports bar menu. There are tons of TVs, which I think is really the main qualification for any place to go watch sports, and it actually has a really great atmosphere when it's full. I've watched a couple of World Series games for the Cardinals there, and it's wonderful.
Where do I go for barbecue in St. Louis?
So there's actually two places that kind of have overlapping ownership. One is called Pappy's. They're both in the city. Pappy's is going to be a little bit closer to the SLU University area, and it has a line out the door most days at lunch and definitely on the weekends. And they have great ribs. The other place that, again, that's kind of in the same family is called Bogarts and has some similar flavor. But what distinguishes their ribs, which because I think they win for me, is they take a blowtorch to them and develop this candied glaze on top of them. That's just fantastic.
Blowtorch barbecue. I'm in. Any notable local chefs that we should keep our eye on?
I'm actually waiting to see what one of the kind of younger, well-known chefs is going to do next. His name is Josh Galliano. He used to be at a restaurant called Monarch, and right now he's kind of developing his next project. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what he does.
Last question. Where would you like to have your last meal before death?
This is not going to be a St. Louis place that anybody else can really go to. It's going to be my dad's fried chicken. But if for some reason he didn't feel like making it,
your dad's like, I know you're dying, but no, I'm busy tonight.
why don't you go out and go grab something?
Right.
I may go grab a donut at World's Fair Donuts. Who cares? I don't need to have a balanced meal. Let's just go get a bunch of buttermilk glazed donuts and have a dozen of them. World's Fair Donuts is by St. Louis Botanical Garden, which if you're coming to St. Louis and you're going to be eating a bunch, I highly recommend going to the Botanical Garden and walking some of it off.
All right. Pasteuria is your restaurant recommendation. It is located at 7734 Forsyth Boulevard. It is in Clayton, which is a section of St. Louis, and you can find it online at pasteriastl.com. Laura Bentley of the Moscow Circus, where can people find you online?
It's at themoscowcircus.wordpress.com. And my Twitter handle is at the Moscow Circus.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to give us a restaurant recommendation.
Absolutely, Seth. I hope everyone comes to St. Louis.
All right, we will make our next trip out to St. Louis. My name is Seth Ressler. This has been the Fine Dining Podcast. Couple of notes. First, if you want a mystery meat dinner in your town, here's what you got to do. Go over to mysterymeat.org and click the big orange button that says Get an Invitation and sign up. And then tell all your friends to sign up, and we will host a mystery meat dinner in your city. Speaking of, while you're over there at the website, you can find links to many of the things that we mentioned in today's episode. You can also follow us on Facebook or on Twitter. We are mystery_meat, MEET. Please do us a favor. Head over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and if you're feeling really generous, leave a nice review. And finally, if you are a food blogger or a food event organizer and you want to come on and tell us all about your city and what's going on in your town, please head over to mysterymeat.org, click the Contact Us link, and send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next time.
This has been Mystery Meat's Fine Dining Podcast. You can find links to the websites mentioned in this episode at mysterymeat.org/podcast. Thank you for listening.